Thanks, everybody. I'm Warren Wells. I'm the Policy and Planning Director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Happy to have everybody here tonight. It's our monthly meeting where we have our treater talk, where we have a advocate or activist from usually around the Bay give a talk about their work, and then we kind of break out into area-based groups. So actually, just since we have a smaller group, I'd love to just go around the horn, have everyone introduce themselves and say where they are today. Don, I'll start with you.
Okay, I'm in Mill Valley, Don Herzog, and been working, trying to get the Alto Tunnel open and being a pain in the ass of all the politicians for about 20 years now.
That's right. That's the only way to do it. David? Sorry, I muted you, David, earlier. Here we go.
There we go. Hi, I'm David. I'm in Novato, and as you can probably know, I'm new to the group. And so I'm interested in the Novato group, I guess, that is trying to start up here.
Great. Happy to have you. What part of Novato are you in?
Kind of central Novato.
Cool. My wife grew up just near Miwok Park.
Okay, I'm not far from Miwok Park.
Cool. Is it Zaz? Zaz?
Yes, it is Zaz, like
Zaz.
Zaz.
Great.
Yeah, I'm in Novato as well. And yeah, just joined very, very recently. I'm kind of a scrub on a bike, but want things to be better.
Great. There's no experience necessary here. Just interest. That's all.
Yeah.
Alejandro?
Hi, another Nevadaoan. Yeah.
Great. Nick?
Hey, sorry, I was trying to figure out my doppelganger situation. Hey, everybody. Nick Pappas, I'm in San Anselmo. We just moved here a few months ago, and yeah, excited to be part of the effort. And Warren, I also wanted to say the Adventure Revival was a spectacular ride. So kudos to MCBC for pulling that off this weekend.
Great. I had very little to do with it, but I'm glad you had fun. George, I'll introduce you later. So I just wanted to run through a quick, do a little kind of MCBC bulletin, just where I describe kind of some of the stuff that's going on. Get a quick little inside scoop, just a few words about some projects that people may have interest in. So, and I usually post these to YouTube, so sometimes people will click on that later. So just on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, for people following that project, there is going to be, I'd mentioned in our last meeting that there might be a meeting about it in October. It looks like the meeting where we'll decide what will happen with the bridge will be in November. That'll be a meeting to decide whether they keep the multi-use path or move it to just a shoulder on weekdays and a pathway on weekends. Going south, I should structure these south to north. On Bridgeway in Sausalito, one of our most trafficked, bike trafficked roads in the county. Oh shoot, interesting. Wonder who the other Nick is and how they can get. Well, we'll sort that out. Maybe they'll email me. Bridgeway, the Bridgeway has been working on putting in bike lanes in the kind of the section just south of the ferry landing for some time since I've been working at MCBC, but we're actually finally moving forward with that, or moving forward. It's not set in stone, but there's going to be a meeting of their PBAC in October to see the potential designs. And they're also, thanks to help from local advocates, Sausalito is applying for grants to extend the Mill Valley Sausalito path south from its current terminus at Mike's Bikes at Gate 6 Road, about a half mile down to Harbor. So we got them to apply for a grant for that. It's not constructed, but it's a necessary first step. Another exciting projects and kind of big corridor projects, Bellum Boulevard in San Rafael. It's kind of one of our biggest, scariest roads in the county. It kind of cuts sort of north, sort of east-west through the canal. There's a project going on early stages on Bellum Boulevard, and we saw some initial designs, and they're planning, thanks to pushing from us and some of our friends in San Rafael, to put a multi-use path in on both sides of the street. Right now, it's like a door zone painted bike lane next to busy traffic. It's awful, almost unrideable. Most people ride on the sidewalk. So they're planning to put in like an extra wide sidewalk that you can ride above the curb on both sides of the street. So really excited about the direction that's moving in. There's going to be a public meeting for that for Bellin Boulevard, probably on November 14th.
That was the one we were.
The Vista Point Trail, going back down south, Vista Point Trail is the trail that connects the east side of the Golden Gate Bridge down to Conselman. That should be going to construction in December. We've been working on that for a long time. Couple other things. You may all be aware there's an election coming up, despite the federal election, which we may have all our own feelings about. There are local elections, and which are somewhat less consequential. MCBC does candidate questionnaires. We send questionnaires out to every person running for a competitive seat in Marin. And we're going to have those responses posted to our website probably the end of next week. So before you get your ballot. So keep an eye out for that. Those will be really fun to see. And we have this. Oh, Nick has his hand up. Yeah, Nick.
Hey, Warren. Sorry, I'm moving around doing chores. On the candidates, excited to see the questionnaires. I've been wondering about whether there's any like other bike engagement we could do, like a ride along from candidates on a bike bus event, or like come see this infrastructure. Like this, when they're candidates, that I feel like they're more inclined to pay attention to these things. So
yeah, I mean, if you want, I mean, George is going to talk about that. If you want anyone's emails, I'm happy to. That's a great idea. I usually like kind of all I have, because there's so many of them. All I have time for is like the questionnaire and a brief like. I'll try to get a Zoom call or phone call with people. I don't have a time for a ride with everybody, but I really encourage folks to. I'm happy to send anybody's email if you want to make that offer.
let's bring all the San Anselmo candidates up Fawn Drive.
Yeah, great.
San Anselmo inside joke, but I would love to get some engagement there.
Yeah, great. Bridget, were you putting your hand up or just waving? Okay, great. Just a win. People may, this is on the off-road side, but we're going to be seeing single track trails on Mount Tam the first time kind of ever. That's a big win from our off-road team, not the side that I work on, but exciting. And the last thing, we have an event coming up. We do a Biketoberfest event in Fairfax, and that'll be October 12th. It's a really fun time. Ride your bikes there. There's like literally a bike, probably the biggest bike parking lot you've ever seen, with like 700 bikes there. And there's live music and food, and it's a good time. Great. Okay, so that's all I have for the MCBC bulletin. I'm going to turn it over to our speaker today, who is George Spies. George is a resident of Oakland. Sorry, George, I didn't get a full bio for you, but George worked in screenwriting for.
What are you saying?
Oh, did you? Oh, shoot! I switched. Oh, great. Do I have it? George, there we go. Great, have it. George is a former filmmaker who raised a daughter in Oakland. Once she was out of college, or off to college, George got the opportunity to work out of the Netherlands for a year, and he was there when COVID broke out. By the time he got back, he was orange pilled, as some people call it. He was fully indoctrinated into the way of Dutch biking, and started looking for opportunities for advocacy. He started working with our partners in the East Bay, the Bike East Bay, which is the advocacy organization in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And from there, he was there when a group called Traffic Violence Rapid Response emerged, which he has been with since. It was an all-volunteer organization that has been doing some really important work in the East Bay and engaging with electeds. And that's why I invited, and George is also a personal friend, and I want to invite him here to talk about some of the great work he and his colleagues have been doing there. Thank you so much, George.
Of course, and we've got a few folks who've joined.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we can just finish the intros, and then I can get started.
Great. Yeah. So just Eric and Bill, if you just want to say, and Bill and Lauren, if you guys just want to say your names and where you're calling from. When you're on the Zoom call. It's not a radio show.
Hi, everyone. Bill, Nora, and Lauren here.
Oh, Nora's getting so big.
We're in San Rafael. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for joining us.
And looks like Eric's maybe staying on mute. So maybe you can start. You can go ahead, George.
Sure, of course. I'm happy to do that. I do have a prezo, so I'm going to try this. I haven't in the past been able to slideshow off of Google Slides, but let's give it a try and see what happens. You can tell me whether it works or not.
It's looking good. Looks good.
Is it full screen?
Full screen. Looks great.
All right. Hi, everybody. Okay, I am here talking about the work of a group that I'm part of called Traffic Violence Rapid Response. And we're just some Oaklanders pushing for safe streets. And I think that that's important, an important part of the story. And I just put this presentation together literally in the last couple of hours, so bear with me. This is us plus some folks. Someone was struck and killed at the corner of 27th and Broadway in Oakland about a month and a half or so ago. And when someone is killed on the streets of Oakland by a car driver, we try, it doesn't always work, and it's complicated. I'm going to talk about that, but we try to get out to the location where it happened, investigate the situation, and then plan, if possible, to do a commemorative action for that person. This guy who passed away was in his late 60s. He was a bike advocate himself. His name's Stephen Bloom, and he wanted his death to be politicized, right? So he was part of a few different advocacy communities. So mixed in here with bike and safety advocates are some folks who were tenant organizers and some other people, all of whom came together to memorialize Steve. We marched around and carried signs. We spoke about the person who left, and we made some demands of the city. And that's a very typical kind of thing that we do. This is kind of the backbone of our work, is to do these commemorative actions. Here's another photo of a similar action, obviously a lot fewer people. This was out at Hagenberger in Hamilton, which is not far from the freeway. It's a desolate spot where an eight lane surface highway rips right through the middle of a residential neighborhood in East Oakland. And someone had been killed here, as you can see, October 3rd. And the sad part about it is when we were there, we didn't even have a name for the person who had died. We didn't learn it until later, and I'll get to that as well. But we sort of dedicated ourselves for a while. Our primary focus was to do these actions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the genesis of that was and why we decided to do that. It kind of was a spontaneous emergence. If you think about what working towards community streets is, and I'm sure that Warren through MCBC does some of this work, right? There's different kinds of work that you can do. We're obviously very focused in the direct action area. It's a lot of what we do, but we also engage with policymakers. We come up with policy ideas as well sometimes, and we certainly engage the public. But our primary focus started out as direct action. So kind of our core approach is that I'll just tell a little bit of a story before I go through this slide. This was several people who were talking to each other on Twitter, right? And someone was struck and killed by a car. This is back in late May of 2022. And it was an intersection that many of us bicycled through on a regular basis. And it just struck close to home, right? And one of the people that I was interacting with online said, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to bring some stuff to make signs, and if anybody wants to come, show up. And he thought maybe he was going to get, 3 or 4 people. And we had like, I don't know, 2 dozen. And I was there and I met him, Brian, who you'll see a little bit later, and some other folks. And we sort of coalesced into doing these kinds of actions. And part of why that happened was in between the time that Jonathan died and the time that we got out there to protest his death, someone else had been killed on the streets of Oakland, an older woman, Amelia Martinez, who was crossing the street to go to church out in East Oakland. And we thought, well, if we're going to do it for one, we should do it for all. So then that was the slippery slope. 2022 was a bad year for Oakland. Between 35 and 40 people died on the streets of Oakland that year. And it was almost as many in 2023. So we started doing these kind of hand over fist, and it was a tough time, but also extremely eliminating. So what were we doing? We were doing this first part, right? We were making the issue visible, right? People were getting struck and killed. Sometimes you'd know it happened because there was a traffic report that traffic was slowed down because someone had been hit and killed in a car, right? And that's pretty much all you got. You never got a name or the circumstances or anything like that. So we were trying to make it visible that people were dying and they're people. And so we were working really hard on just making it visible. And also paired with that was kind of a rejection of the status quo. Like we can't live like this, right? So that's where we started, and that's why our name is Traffic Violence Rapid Response, because we were responding as quickly as we could to the traffic violence that was unfolding on the streets. So that's kind of our genesis story, and the work that we've done has evolved over the months and now 2 years. But really, it's just like literally this guy said, I've got some poster board and some markers, and I'm going to go to 55th and Shattuck on thus and such a day at thus and such a time. And like people showed up, and we started talking to each other, and that's kind of how it happened. So that's a low barrier to entry, in my view, right? So that's my first main point, right? Is it can happen, you can do it. And while we did that work, we started to come into some of these other points, which I think are really important for doing advocacy work. And one is finding the language to talk in, to speak in, to talk about what it is what you're seeing and what you want to have happen. And a lot of the language, as I'm sure many of you already know, that is typically used in the media and what is conditioned, right, is, there was a traffic accident, right? And we rejected that idea, right? That there are no accidents, that there's a crash, right? The car didn't kill somebody, the driver did, but also it's not just the driver and not just the car, right? It's the system, the overall transportation system. So we were trying to find these words and trying to stitch them together to be able to create some kind of a narrative. And that evolved into being able to ask for the press to come, because the first time we went out there, we didn't invite any press, or the second time, right? It took us a little while to kind of figure out what we were doing. But we worked on creating a narrative and the language to tell that story, as the work went on. And that's something that I think has proved really valuable for us. And I think it's an important element of any kind of advocacy work, if you think about it. And then another thing that was important, and I've got other slides here I'll get to, but is to center one's advocacy on the community rather than on one's own experience, right? Like when I bicycle, like I almost got hit by somebody, I don't know, a week ago, who was swerving around somebody else because they were impatient, and my life flashed before my eyes. That's not important to other people. That's important to me, right? What's important to other people is that this happens, right? It's not just me. It happens out in the world, and it's dangerous, and some people get caught by it, right? And badly harmed or killed. So, and it's uneven, right? This happens more in some places than others. And so that kind of recentering one's perspective from your own experience as in this case, a bicyclist, right, on the streets, and then zooming out and seeing a broader pattern, and then trying to see how can I how can I take my energy, which is generated from my own experience, and then transform that into something that is supportive of the community as a whole. This is valuable for other reasons, which we will also get to. And then we started coming up with specific things, right? Like at the beginning, it was, hey, a real person died here, hit by a car. We don't want that, right? To the reason this happened was that the road itself was designed improperly, and it set up the conditions under which this person was killed. So we need to change those conditions, and then we need to learn what those conditions are and how to name them, etc. So there was some learning there for sure, some education, but we were able to focus what it was that we were asking for. And then finally, this is a really important element at the end, which is at that first action, there was somebody who was getting out in the street and blocking the cars and yelling at the drivers. And that upset me because the person in the car wasn't the person who had killed the bicyclist. They were trying to get home, right? And they probably had a perfectly decent reason for trying to get home. Like they wanted to eat dinner, or they wanted to pick up their kid from school, or whatever it was. So we established fairly early on as a group that we were going to take other people in good faith. And we were going to operate in good faith. And that, I think, helps a tremendous amount to not make enemies and to create potential allies just by avoiding not making those potential allies into enemies. Everybody together on with me so far? Good? Thanks, Warren. So what have we done? We've done a bunch of those protest actions. We now call them commemorative protest actions because they're not all vigils. It got to be a little complicated because we called them vigils at first because a group that we modeled ourselves after, Safe Street Rebel in San Francisco, they called them vigils. But in Oakland, there are many different communities, not all of which really overlap very well, right? There's a Latino immigrant community, or several. There's the African American community, and maybe that's several as well. And a lot of the folks in our group are, college educated white folks on bicycles. So, and then people have ideas about what a vigil is, right? It's like, we're going to come, we're going to light some candles, we're going to talk about the person. And like, what are you doing protesting about the street conditions when I thought we were trying to remember this person who died? And we saw those two things going together, but it's a complicated thing to stage a protest around a specific person's death who we did not know personally, right? So that was complicated. So we've done a lot of soul searching around how do we manage this, and we've modified some of our practices, and now we call them commemorative protest. And we keep the word protest in there because we want everyone to understand that that's what it is. It's a protest. One of the things that happened was that there was a bond measure being authored in Oakland in 2022 that would pay for the repaving of the streets, along with building some affordable housing and repairing the libraries and whatnot. And we had the idea, it wasn't me, somebody else, that we should tie the repaving program being funded by this measure to infrastructure improvements, safety improvements. So we worked with some folks who had some knowledge of that, and we developed some modified language, and we had been asking our council members to come out to our protests. And there was a really sad one that happened the night that the Warriors won the championship in 2022. And somebody was racing excitedly and killed a man in front of his two kids. And we had a protest vigil for that person, and we invited the local council member there. And she was very moved by it because she met the man's children. And she couldn't get over like the impact that death was going to have. So she became our ally, and she helped introduced a modification in the language, and then we promised that we would get out on the street and help pass the measure. So we did. We went to the farmers markets, and we, every weekend for 6 weekends in a row to get that thing passed, which has helped a lot, gave us some credibility, and allowed us to do more, right? And help us build relationships in the city government. We did a petition drive around a particular project. We identified through our vigil actions that there was a particular street in Oakland, International Boulevard, which was far and away the most dangerous street in Oakland. It's probably one of the most dangerous streets in all of the Bay Area. And so we really focused our efforts on changing that street, and it's now finally being changed after a 2-year effort. But that was a big campaign focus for us. Part of that was developing data-driven reporting that we could use with policymakers to show that we weren't just bleeding heart liberals waving our hands. We had data, right? And we had evidence. And so we had some people who are good at data and good at mapping, and they helped us develop some really robust reports that convinced some folks who otherwise wouldn't have been convinced that work needed to happen. So that was a part of that campaign. And through all of this, I'd say that one of the things that we did that was the most important was that we made traffic violence and road safety salient political issues, right? I was in Berkeley the other day, and there was a woman who was running for city council, not the kind of person I would have expected. And she had traffic safety on her little handout flyer twice, right? Like, okay, suddenly this is a thing that people need to pay attention to. So that's been a really gratifying thing to be able to put that into the political conversation locally. Okay. I hope I'm not taking up too much time. I'm good?
You're good, George. Yeah, maybe like, a few more minutes, and like, I don't know how many more slides you have. Yeah, and then we gotta do some Q&A.
So again, making it visible, putting up signs, right? Using the press. We always invite the press, but they're not always wanting to deliver our message. Especially Oakland has a bad reputation locally, and the press is happy to drive anti-Oakland narratives. So we've learned to be a little bit careful about who we invite. Building the moral case. I think this is important. We decided that we were a pedestrian safety organization pretty early on, that biking is a niche interest, but everybody walks at one point or another, especially folks who are the most disadvantaged, right? The folks who are transit dependent, etc. So we really focused on that. This photo, this is that dangerous street I was telling you about, International Boulevard. And those two posts right there are steel posts. And they were struck by a speeding vehicle so hard that they were both flattened. And that speeding vehicle had just killed somebody, like literally yards before that collision. I used that photo to talk to people about what the hell we were talking about, because we needed to make it clear that change had to happen and that people couldn't sit on their asses about it, right? Making that status quo indefensible. Another big important thing, piece of advice is get out in the field. Go and look. This is a place where someone else was struck by a speeding vehicle coming down the hill on a multi-lane road, right, with very few traffic controls. And she was crossing the street to that bus stop right there, and she got knocked into this gully against that fence. Being out there, seeing it, taking the pictures, being able to talk about it, super, super important. And as I said, we tried to change the political calculus, right? We tried to educate ourselves to be able to talk about what we were needing and why it was important, because we're trying to convince the people who don't know what we're talking about to make decisions that they don't understand, right? We had to make them understand it, see it, feel it. right? So that's where that language comes in, right? Finding a way to explain it to the normies, right? How do we make this something that other people can feel and join and help, right? Again, we don't want to make any enemies because you have to build your relationships to get where you need to go. And I think that's my last slide. Yep.
Thanks so much, George. Great
I hope
presentation.
that's kind of what you were looking for.
Yeah, I know that's great. And I just want to say a couple of things, and I want to open up to folks if they have questions for you. I mean, I also want to say, I think the work you're doing is great. I'm really impressed by the success. You know, you guys, speaking of someone who gets paid to do this work, I'm really impressed by that work that volunteers have had on this, like really bringing multiple millions of dollars to these important projects to make these roads safer. So thank you for that. And it's something that I always have struggled with. I know, like, I think it's easy to like kind of, speaking to someone who's in bike advocacy, like, it's easy to sort of shy away from like the kind of the icky stuff of like, oh, people are getting hit out there. And it's sort of scary, and it's tempting to just kind of want to talk about the joy of it. But the fact is, like, the fact that the reason there aren't more people riding bikes, at least, is because people are afraid to. And so there are some places that are safe to ride, like the Bay Trail, the Novi Saucido Path, and we all know this, and we stick to those streets. But many people are not. Most people in Novato don't want to ride on Novato Boulevard because they know it's unsafe.
Yep.
And what you're saying is we have to disrupt that status quo and say, like, that's not okay. Why should people feel unsafe on any road in our city? And that takes people have to be sort of jarred out of that belief, and that takes shock to people sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something important too, that like it's really important for this to be an element, right, of the advocacy, is to point to the hard parts. But it can be emotionally very exhausting. And we did have some group burnout. And so our rate of doing vigils has fallen off, even though unfortunately the rate of deaths hasn't really fallen off that much.
Does anybody have any questions I have a couple questions, but I wanted to open up to the group first. And if
I'm totally open to any way you guys want to take this.
How are you funded?
Go ahead, Don.
How are you funded?
We are funded out of our pockets.
Okay.
Yeah, what do your expenses look like? It's mostly signs.
We print material, like we do a little bit of printing. When we do these actions, we print up half sheet flyers and tape them up, and then just go to the copy shop. And we have little quarter sheet handouts at the time of the event, giving people like, this is what happened, call your city council member. So it's not expensive. We just pay for it ourselves.
And then just a bunch of volunteer in-kind time donation. Yeah. Which Don is very familiar with, I'll say. Though Don is also very generous in more than in-kind. Nick, you have your hand up.
Hey, George, thanks for what you're doing. That seems like a very intense effort to lead and a really impactful one. And I don't know how you get the list of people who want their deaths to be politicized, but please, hopefully, God forbid, put me on it. I am really interested in thinking about how to translate the work that you're doing to some of the advocacy and organizing that I think MCBC is doing. I'm new in town, but I sense they're kind of the lead organization, and I want to be a part of. I sense there may be some opportunities out here that are more focused around the experience of biking, particularly for kids trying to get to school, that are a little less morbid, that might get some, like I was mentioning the idea of a ride along earlier. I think that something I often fall into, a trap I often fall into, is preaching to myself as the choir when I rant online about bikes. And I think all of us we have this visceral experience, and getting other people to feel that experience through the kind of work that you're doing, or the experience of being on a bike, I think is really important. And so I guess it's a very open-ended question, but would just love to hear from you and hear from the group on how do we build that lived experience and empathy among the decision makers in our community at a time when I'm feeling in my community a rising rage against bikers more than empathy towards bikers.
Yeah, it's a bummer. And I couple things to say. One, that friendly council member, what actually happened, the detail is that one of our members had already been in some level of communication with her. And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll come by and pick you up and we'll bicycle down to the event together.
To the vigil on 14th, right?
Vigil on 14th Street. And she said, oh, okay. And by the time she got there, she was completely terrified because she just had that experience, right? So you're exactly right that ride-alongs can be extremely effective. And you kind of want to do both, right? You want to do the positives. Look how nice it is to be able to bicycle from here to there on a comfortable path that's safe. And then you get to that intersection where, like, oh my God, this is a very different thing, right? So so drawing that contrast and designing your ride in a way that you can get a couple of city council members or the mayor or the guy who runs the public works department or whatever to get out on their bikes and just make it both attractive and unavoidable, right? To the extent that you can. And, you know, and take care of them, but also then again, make the moral case, right? It's not about you and you're ranting about bicycling. It's about kids getting to school. It's about grandma getting to church and not, you know, and like, at what point do we take the keys away from grandma, right? If she's car dependent and she can't get to where she's going without the car, it's not going to be as easy, right? And so there's a bunch of different elements. One of the lines in one of my slides is Anna Zivart's, her book, When Driving's Not an Option, says that up to a third of Americans do not drive because they can't or they're whatever. That's a lot of people. Right?
Yeah,
So
too old, too old, too young, or disabled, right? That gets you to a third.
Or too poor to have a car, or whatever that might be, right? So that's, I think, a really interesting angle to find the sympathetic element there and not have it be the guy in spandex on a bicycle, right? Because that is unfortunately an unsympathetic thing. Zaz had a question.
Hi, yeah. So I hope this doesn't reflect poorly on me, but how do you find out about these people who've gotten hit? Because, like, I don't know, I looked up traffic stats and, like, in 2023, like 13 kids were killed, and it's like I feel like I should have heard about this in my city.
Yeah.
And I just didn't at all.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite hard. It's quite hard. So we are very, very lucky to have a local digital newspaper here called Oakland Side, and they focus just on Oakland. And they have a guy whose beat it is to cover street safety, and he's an invaluable ally, and he calls the coroner every week to find out if anybody's been killed. And so he'll text us and say, hey, did you hear about XYZ? Do you know anything about it? Right. Sometimes we'll come across somebody's put out some candles and flowers at a spot, right? And you kind of investigate. The Citizen app sometimes has reporting. Yeah, it's piecemeal. If your police department releases information on traffic fatalities, getting on that mailing list is a great first start.
And I'll say, like, I mean, this is a thing where, like, you know, Oakland, I mean, I would say happily, like most of our communities in Marin, I'll say it's maybe San Rafael and Novato to a degree, being kind of the notable standouts, do not have, like in my time at MCBC, there have been I've been here since early 2021. There have been 3 people killed riding a bike, and I don't know how many people are killed walking, but fewer than 10. You know, again, compared to Oakland, where it's like that's like all of that would be one good year. You know, like, I mean, obviously, like, Oakland is 5 times the size of Marin. So I'll say, Zaz, to your question, like, it's often reported in the IJ. If you just check the Marin IJ, they're typically like reporting on at least a bicyclist fatal crash. They don't always catch every pedestrian who is killed. So George's points are good. I sometimes sort of hear about it on someone texts me, but that's kind of like it can be hard. It's gonna be hard to hear about if you're not calling coroner.
And I will add that the more marginal,
yes,
the community, the less likely you are to hear about it.
And that's why you don't hear about pedestrians being killed, because it's much. If you hear about someone riding being killed, it's more often someone who's a recreational rider on Sir Francis Drake or, you know, out on Route 1, where the people who are being killed walking are there was, someone, crossing,
Homeless
against the
people,
signal.
day laborers.
Yeah,
et
crossing
cetera.
against the signal on Bellum or on South Nevada Boulevard or something. And that just doesn't merit the same coverage, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I just want to add something like I think, George, and this is like, I really appreciate the work you do, because like you, again, like you only, like, I wish we could get everything we wanted done by being positive. And sometimes we have to, like, I gotta think of you as like, stretching the analogy, like you're the bad cop sometimes, because like
Yeah.
but we have to have those sides of things. Like, I mean, like,
Yeah.
I think with Councilmember Fife, she was moved by this like kind of horrible crash, in a way that like I kind of can't, because she was, but you had to bring her there. You didn't just send her an email or send her the link or something. You did the human thing, the outreach. You brought her there. Someone held her hand, rode her there. And that was the thing, that human connection changed her mind on that. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and that's an important part of what we do. We try to get the council members out there, and we try to get the family out there, and we try to get the family in front of the council member so that they can express themselves. And sometimes that expression is just crying, but it's important, right? Because those are the stakes. So
yeah, and I want to be conscious of your time and everybody else's time here, but I just kind of
I'm
want
easy, do whatever you want.
Great. I just want to say, like, just if I can leave everyone with one thing again, like, this is like what George is doing is like, I sort of change our presenters around. What George is doing is intense, and it's really powerful, and I have great respect for the work. And also the lasting lesson is like, it's like George and a few, like, I mean, how many active people are there in TVR? A couple, like
about a dozen,
20. Yeah. Like it's a bunch. It's like a relatively small number of volunteers in a city of 250,000 people, having a huge impact by devoting like not 40 hours a week doing this. And none of you guys are experts. Like, you're not a transportation planner by background.
No.
So it really speaks to the power that like average people, non-experts, can have in affecting the world around them, just by making those human outreaches to our elected representatives. So
yeah, that's kind of what I mean by making the moral case, right? It's like everybody wants to do the right thing, right? And so what you have to do is redefine what the right thing is, right? Their own conscience, unless it's, TFG, will drive them to be able to live with themselves. And so it's really about making sure that they understand that the right thing is to make the streets safer, right? That delaying commuters by, 15 seconds on a daily basis in order to make this particular intersection safer, and saving only maybe one life every 18 months is entirely worth it. Right? Do you want that person to pay with their life so that these other people can get home a little bit faster?
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Cool. Well, thank you, George. I really appreciate, unless anyone else has any questions, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this evening.
And TVRR, TVRR.substack.com. You can read our stuff. You can sign up for the mailing list. And if you want to get a hold of me, Warren can put you in touch, and I'm happy to discuss it in more length for those of you who are interested.
Wonderful. Thank you, George. Have a great day. I'll see you on the bike path.
Thank you for making time for me.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye.